Hey guys, I'm Tainted Marv, and today I want to talk about a mystery that has puzzled the One Piece community for a very long time, and one that people have widely different opinions on, namely the ringed eyes that we see on folks like Mihawk or Emu. Because, even though Oda is currently in the process of uncovering one old mystery after another, there are still things like these eyes that continue to occupy our minds. And even though there are people out there who believe that these eyes are nothing more than a simple design choice and do not mean anything at all, I strongly disagree. Because when we take a look at which characters actually have this type of eyes, we can, with a bit of detective work, start to recognize certain patterns. And there are quite a few of these characters, including people like Emu, Dragule Mihawk, Caribou, Cavendish and more, not to forget creatures like Zunisha. I will of course go over every single one of them, including those I have not mentioned yet, and explain why my idea regarding these eyes might finally explain what is really going on here once and for all. And trust me when I say that Mihawk fans in particular might not be very happy with my theory. But not only that, it might also explain what's going on with Zoro's closed left eye. I'll also explain what I believe the ringed eyes actually represent, what kind of abilities they might unlock, and why all of this connects back to Buddhism. Creating videos like that, however, takes a lot of effort, especially since I do everything on my own. And believe me when I tell you that this takes a huge amount of work and time. So if you end up enjoying this video, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like and maybe even a subscribe. But enough of that. It is time to finally demystify these damn eyes once and for all. So, what do we already know about these eyes? Well, strictly speaking, not much. Actually, almost nothing. What we do know is that these eyes are often depicted as having several concentric rings. Normally, One Piece characters have one of two types of eyes. Number one is the extremely normal black dot. There are two versions of this. One is a single black dot that functions as the iris, and the other one is a black dot with the ring around it. Characters with these eyes include Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, Rayleigh and Kobe. It can also be observed that this eye design is often reserved for male characters, with a few exceptions such as Perona. The second type is what I call the classic anime eye. Large eyes with a visible iris and pupil, often colored in multiple shades and reflecting light in various ways. This eye shape is often reserved for female characters such as Nami, Robin, Shirahoshi or Boa Hancock, although there are exceptions here as well. For example, well, actually I cannot think of a male character with these eyes right now, so if you know one, let me know in the comments. But back to the ringed eyes. These are the exceptions and the third type of eyes, and what is really crazy is that despite being extremely rare, they are never addressed or mentioned by any character in the manga itself. Not even Robin, when she is standing face to face with Hakuba or Cavendish, ever comments on his ringed eyes, even though she is usually extremely observant. And that is strange, because normally no one in One Piece is too shy to point out unusual features. Just think about Buggy and his red clown nose, which gets brought up constantly. Even Whitebeard called him a red-nosed freak. But the eyes? No one ever mentions them. We do not know what they are, what they mean, absolutely nothing. Okay, the One Piece wiki mentions that Mihawk's eyes are red in the manga and yellow in the anime, but what does this matter? Exactly, nothing. Factually, we know absolutely nothing about the ringed eyes, other than that they exist and that certain characters have them. Of course, as already mentioned, there are plenty of other theories about what could cause ringed eyes. For example, theories about possession or shared consciousness. One very popular theory is that ringed eyes represent possession, influence or a second being inside someone. Another variation of this is the idea of souls, inner entities or power within. The rings are thought to show access to another soul, spirit or eternal entity. This idea often comes up with discussions about characters like Cavendish and Hakuba, where his alternate self is literally another personality. Then there is this idea of demon-like ominous symbolism. Some discussions equate the look with something demonic, sinister or corrupted, especially in those way too serious power scaling threads on Reddit, where people suggest that ringed eyes hint at a demonic power, possession or evil influence. And finally, there is the extreme haki or unique traits theory. Some fans believe the rings signify insanely powerful haki, especially Conqueror's haki, as if the will of the user is so dominant that it changes their appearance. And if we are honest, all of these ideas are actually pretty similar and ultimately lead to the same conclusion. And I do not want to say that they are completely wrong, because what is truly correct or not will only be revealed once Oda explains himself someday. I mean, he will explain it, right? Right? But let me briefly explain why I believe that these theories do not fully work. When it comes to the possession idea, this can no longer work after the most recent chapters, since we now know about Imu's ability, Domi Reversi. And if you ask me, that ability is the perfect example of actual possession. Just look at Dory and Broggy. They are both clearly possessed due to Imu's taking control, and yet their eyes do not have the ring design. And this does not just apply to them, but also to Rox in the flashback. I cannot see any rings there at all. On top of that, I personally believe that a possessed character should act accordingly. For example, like Dory and Broggy. A possessed character should not appear calm and normal like Zunisha or Mihawk, but rather completely unhinged, just like everyone affected by Imu's Domi Reversi. So when talking about the idea of a demonic presence, I think everything I have already said can more or less be used to debunk it. Because if you look at all the characters under the influence of Domi Reversi, it becomes pretty clear what a character under demonic influence should look like, right? As for the idea of the second soul residing in the same body, I actually find this one more believable, and I will extend on this a bit later, especially when looking at Cavendish and Hakuba. However, the problem here is that these two only show ringed eyes when both are conscious at the same time. Look at the scene with Robin. When Hakuba has full control, we do not see any pupils at all. When Cavendish has control, the eyes look normal. Only in the state where both are active do we see the ringed eyes. And if we assume that characters with ringed eyes are always in this state, then why do Mihawk, Zunisha, Caribou and Imu never show such behavior? Why is Mihawk not constantly arguing with his second self? You see what I mean? Because of that, this theory does not really make much sense to me either. And that brings us to the last theory, extreme haki. And yes, it is a good idea and it does make sense to assume that there could be a connection. But if that were the case, then why do characters like Shanks, Rayleigh, Roger and Whitebeard not have these eyes even though Caribou and Cavendish have them? No, I'm sorry, but that does not work either. So there has to be another explanation, and I think I have found it. Let me tell you something about hypnosis in One Piece. And trust me, it is worth sticking around because you have probably never looked at it from this angle before. In my opinion, it is very possible that hypnosis in One Piece and the ringed eyes are connected. And if you think about it for just a second, you might already realize this yourself without me giving you any major hints. I mean, just take a look at the eyes of literally every character in every possible form of animation whenever they are being hypnotized. You can see it across cartoons since the very beginning of animation itself. Let's start with Disney. And as we all know, Oda is a huge Disney fan. As far back as the Jungle Book, Mowgli has been hypnotized by the snake Kaa. And if you look closely at that scene, do the eyes not look suspiciously similar to what we see in One Piece? And it really does not matter which cartoon or anime you look at. Whenever hypnosis is involved, it is almost always portrayed through either ringed eyes or spiral eyes. Here for example. Or here. Or here. Or here. Yeah, I think that is enough examples. But do not think for a second that I'm going to leave it at a pure visual comparison. That would be pretty boring and on top of that lazy. And besides, I already know that some of you very attentive viewers are probably already throwing the first objection my way, which would be, if hypnosis causes ringed eyes, then why did none of the people Django hypnotized have ringed eyes, including Luffy? And yes, that is a very good objection. But here is the thing, Oda is not exactly known for handing us obvious answers on a silver platter. And on top of that, it would be extremely revealing if we were to uncover Mihawk's secret this early in the story. And trust me, if I'm right, then this is both an incredibly powerful and extremely funny secret. And no, I'm not going to dodge this very valid objection. I will present a counter argument to it. Just not yet. First, let us quickly take a look at the other instances of hypnosis that occur in One Piece. Because Django is not the only one who is capable of making people believe things that are not entirely true. There is for example good old Miss Goldenweek. Okay fine, she's not that old, but we have not seen her in quite a while. She also possesses an ability that is not entirely unlike traditional hypnosis. As you all know, or maybe have forgotten over time, she is capable of using a special form of hypnosis through her ability as a painter, one that is based on colors. Through this, she is able to influence the behavior of others. And as we saw in Little Garden, this method is actually extremely effective. And then, of course, there is Lafitte, the man I dedicated my very first theory to, and who remains one of the biggest mysteries within Blackbeard's crew to this day. He too is capable of using hypnosis, as he himself confirms in chapter 576, when he explains that he hypnotized Marines in order to manipulate the gates of justice. So, hypnosis is something that undeniably exists in One Piece, and it is also something that clearly works. And with that in mind, let me now address the valid objection from earlier. If ringed eyes are used as a sign of hypnosis in other media, how can it be that people hypnotized by Django do not have ringed eyes? Well, I believe the answer is as follows. There are two forms of hypnosis in One Piece. Regular hypnosis, which we know from all the previous mentioned characters, and self-hypnosis. And this is where things start to get interesting. Because I believe that every character who has ringed eyes exists in a state of permanent self-hypnosis. And this self-induced hypnosis can either be intentional or unintentional. I believe there are hints that this state of mind actually exists within One Piece. But before we continue, I need to clarify something. Sometimes characters like Luffy, Big Mom, Zoro, Roger and a few others get mentioned as part of the ringed eyes group, but to be honest, I do not count these cases. Whenever we have seen something that resembled ringed eyes on them, it was always because they were either shocked, extremely manic or in a very concentrated state. We actually see this kind of thing quite often in One Piece. Even Nami has displayed a similar look when shocked. In my opinion, that simply shows dilated pupils. Zoro, for example, belongs to the group of characters who have the black dot with a thin ring around it. This can sometimes look similar to ringed eyes, but in my opinion, it is not the same thing. Therefore, I'm going to ignore these brief moments and focus on the 5 main candidates. As mentioned earlier, I believe this state of self-induced permanent hypnosis can happen intentionally or unintentionally. In the real world, there are rare cases where people wake up from comas with new abilities, languages or talents they never displayed before. Not because the brain created something new, but because something that was already there got unlocked. These cases are anomalies in medical literature, rarely reproducible and almost always come with deficits in other areas. In our world, that's a glitch. In One Piece, that's a mechanic. Characters don't just train their bodies, they reshape their minds. They narrow down their identity until nothing else remains. And that, in my opinion, is the closest thing to permanent self-hypnosis we've seen in this series. But we are not in real life, we are in One Piece. And I can very well imagine that Oda applies such a permanent state to certain characters. Therefore, I will try to convince you by briefly analyzing each of the well-known ringed eyes characters and explaining why it is possible that they exist within such a state of consciousness. The characters most commonly mentioned when it comes to the ringed eyes are the following: Emu, Mihawk, Zunisha, Caribou and Cavendish. And I will start directly with Emu. We do not know very much about Emu except that he belonged to the Nerona clan and seemingly made a pact with the devil, if they are not more or less the devil themselves. However, we have seen Emu display ringed eyes time and time again. In fact, aside from the possible crown on their head, this is pretty much the only defining visual trait we can confidently associate with Emu. But there's something else. The fact that Emu appears to be extremely old. When we think back to the mural in Elbaf, it even seems that Emu might appear on it. Unfortunately, there are not many additional hints I can use to further support my theory about Emu, but I would argue that thousands of years is certainly enough time to squeeze in a couple of meditation sessions. And this is also the moment to finally mention what I believe ringed eyes actually represent and what kind of ability they unlock. In my opinion, these eyes reflect a state of enlightenment. In Buddhism, circular symbols represent enlightenment, eternity and the endless cycle of life, death and rebirth known as samsara. Beings who transcend ordinary human existence are often associated with this symbolism, as they are said to perceive reality beyond linear time and individuality. Anime and mythology frequently reflect this idea through visual symbolism, especially by using ringed or circular eyes to mark characters as godlike or enlightened. We see this in series such as Naruto, Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann and Neon Genesis Evangelion. In Naruto, the Rinnegan and the Sage of Six Paths, Rikudo Sennin, directly reference the Buddhist concept of the six paths of rebirth, portraying a character who exists beyond life and death and holds authority over fate and souls. Because of this cultural foundation, ring dice are often interpreted as a visual shorthand for transcendence or enlightenment, marking characters whose nature and abilities are rooted in Buddhist philosophy rather than simply physical strength, and who, if not Imu, has transcended ordinary human existence through a Buddhist lens. After all, the characters I and Mu can be combined to form the kanji for Buddha. And with this transcendence comes certain capabilities. For example, in Buddhism, enlightened beings can perceive samsara, meaning they understand the cycle of birth, death and rebirth. They recognize karma and are no longer bound by linear time. These are traits we can partially attribute to Imu. In this case, we would have to rename karma to the voice of all things, which, as we know, allows one to perceive voices beyond normal comprehension. But I do not want to get too sidetracked. The point here is that ringed eyes are a sign of enlightenment, and that characters who possess them are able to surpass normal limitations and see or understand things that remain hidden from everyone else. On top of that, Imu has seemingly spent their entire life in the secret garden in Marie-Joas, a garden illuminated by the Eve tree's light, filled with white lilies and blue butterflies. White lilies symbolize, among other things, death, mourning and transition into another realm. That fits extremely well with what I just said about Buddhist symbolism, does it not? And the butterflies? What about those? Well, butterflies symbolize transformation or development, but in many cultures they also represent souls or appear in dreams. And again, this perfectly supports what I stated earlier regarding self-hypnosis. But I have not told you everything about that topic yet. I think it's much funnier to save that part for Mihawk. So for now, just remember this. This permanent state of self-hypnosis that I have proposed for Imu and the others grants users the ability to surpass their limits permanently. In Imu's case, I believe their desire for control became so intense and manic that it resulted in what we now know as Imu. But for now, let us continue with Zunisha.
Oh no, wait!
Oh, there you are. I kinda thought you were gone for good.
You will never get rid of me.
Anyway, what do you want?
Before you talk about Zunisha, I gotta ask something.
Sure, go ahead.
Earlier, you basically implied that Imu is able to hear the voice of all things because of the ringed eyes. So how come people like Momo, Oden, Roger and Luffy can hear it without having them?
Oh, good question. Well, let me explain that quickly. I originally wanted to explain this later, but it actually makes more sense to bring it up now. The difference here lies between enlightenment and divine enlightenment. It works like this. In Buddhism there is the Sutra level for humans, the Bodhisattva level for enlightened beings, and the Buddha level, which represents full transcendence. The ability to hear the voice of all things fits in the Sutra or Bodhisattva level. This level represents perception and understanding. Having ringed eyes, however, corresponds to the Buddha level, which represents full transcendence and full comprehension. Characters like Luffy, Momo and Roger have for various reasons already reached the Sutra level, in some cases even from birth. And even if none of us likes the idea that One Piece could end up being a story about a chosen one, we cannot deny that despite all his blood, sweat and tears and effort, Luffy is in some way chosen. Though in One Piece, chosen often means carrying the wills and dreams of others and fulfilling them through action. But let us take a closer look at Luffy when he enters Gear 5, because especially during his first transformation, he actually displayed proper ringed eyes. This is, in my opinion, proof that these eyes are something one can attain through shaping one's mind and spirit. And as silly and chaotic as Luffy may be, he is still incredibly good at understanding people, reading situations and doing what is right. And just to once again use the Naruto comparison, there it worked as follows. Sharingan represents seeing, Mangekyou represents understanding, and Rinnegan represents transcendence. People who are able to hear the voice of all things cannot automatically provide answers. Luffy, for example, could not talk to Zunisha. As he said himself, Zunisha would not listen to him. However, when he was in Gear 5 on Egghead, he suddenly was able to communicate through the voice of all things, and he did so with Emmet. This shows that through Gear 5, He reached the next stage. He became a god, and that god is Nika. And similarly, Imu is a god, and likely the only celestial dragon who actually has the right to call themselves one.
Okay, but then why can Momo talk to Zunisha?
Momo, in my opinion, is different. The Kozuki clan plays a very special role in all of this, and Momo's bloodline and will have been intertwined with the course of the world history for thousands of years. The Kozuki are able to read and write poneglyphs and are considered keepers of history. Therefore, I see the Kozuki clan as a sort of karmic nexus point of world history, and through this, Momo has inherited the karmic fruits of his ancestors' work. Momo does not need to be fully enlightened or ring-diced here to talk to Zunisha. In the Buddhist analogy, voice of all things is perception, not transcendence. Momo belongs to the Kozuki line, which is karmically tied to Joy Boy, Wano and Zunisha. He is not enlightened, he is entangled. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, totally. I understand everything. Absolutely.
Good. Now, let us finally continue with Zunisha. Zunisha is a colossal over 1000-year-old elephant that carries the island of Zou on its back and endlessly wanders through the Grand Line as punishment for a crime we still know nothing about. It can only act when someone understands its voice of all things message and grants it permission to do what must be done. This irreversible eternal task parallels the Buddhist concept of karma as the inevitable consequence of past actions, not as divine punishment, but as a lasting effect that unfolds over time without requiring a moral judge. Yeah, I know, Buddhism piece is hitting hard today. But it fits absolutely perfectly with the Buddhist principle that actions create deep, irreversible consequences that can persist across generations or even entire ages. In Buddhism, true insight does not just mean knowledge. It means understanding how everything is connected through cause and effect over time. The voice of all things symbolizes exactly that: intuitive connection to past, present, and future consequences without the need for language or logic. It is not telepathy, it is perceiving the underlying system of the world itself. Zunisha wanders endlessly until specific conditions are fulfilled. This resembles a personification of samsara, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Except the cycle here is not biological, it is historical and narrative. Zunisha continues to move and fulfill its role until its karma has been resolved. Zunisha is not just a gigantic walk-in monument, it is a living archive of world history. It connects past events with the present and future. This is extremely close to karmic concepts. The world carries memories within itself, and these memories influence the course of events even when they are forgotten by history. Zunisha is, in that sense, the literal embodiment of karmic law. They represent unavoidable consequences, historical guilt, deep perception, and an awareness that views meaning in history long before others can. And that, in my opinion, is also the reason for Zunisha's ringed eyes. This elephant has had more than enough time to reflect on its actions and has been attempting to atone for its past for what feels like an eternity. And that is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Zunisha, in my opinion, has also reached a divine or godlike state.
Wait! You keep talking about enlightenment and stuff, but what does any of this have to do with self-hypnosis?
Alright, I should probably explain that too. If we look closely, the highest goal in Buddhism is nirvana, the state of complete liberation from suffering and from the cycle of rebirth. In that state, one is, philosophically speaking, the most free. Sounds familiar?
この海で一番自由なやつが海賊王だ。
そうか。
In One Piece, there is will, a force that drives characters to pursue their ideals of freedom. Many characters dedicate their entire lives to this pursuit. And that total focus resembles the path towards enlightenment. Doubt disappears, ego disappears, and only the goal remains. But while enlightenment in Buddhism represents freedom, in One Piece the opposite often happens. Characters force themselves into that state. It is not freedom from identity, it is identity without alternative. And that comes very close to permanent self-hypnosis, a state in which one does not try to become something, but instead stops being anything else. We like to joke in the community about him. Mihawk is a fraud, fraud hawk, and so on. And even if that sounds ridiculous at first, there might actually be a spark of truth to it. Don't worry, I don't think he painted his blade black. But it is interesting that the character who bears the title Strongest Swordsman in the World is one of the very few who has ringed eyes. My hypothesis is the following. Mihawk did not become the strongest swordsman because he wanted to. He became the strongest swordsman because he never imagined himself as anything else. That is not motivation, that is identity, a form of permanent self-hypnosis. And don't get me wrong, of course he trained, of course he is strong, but One Piece rewards will and identity more than muscle. Zoro is the best example for that. He chose Mihawk as his final opponent, yet at the same time accepted that Mihawk is the standard. And then something interesting happens. Zoro trains with him and returns from the time skip with a closed eye. I do not think it is simply a scar. I believe Mihawk taught him a technique that does not train the body but the identity itself. Maybe under normal circumstances you have to close both eyes to maintain that state. Maybe Zoro found a way to maintain it with only one. If we go back and look at how Oda drew Mihawk as a child, his eyes were normal. A circle, no rings. At some point something changed. And now he is one of the few characters who exist in that state. And once again the theme of solitude reappears. Whenever we see Mihawk, he is essentially alone. He sailed into the story on a coffin boat by himself. And on the island where he trained Zoro, he lived alone until Perona showed up. Mihawk is the perfect example of a solitary figure. And that is the perfect environment to achieve this mental state, to reprogram yourself, sharpen your identity and literally become what you are. Mihawk is also exceptionally good at perceiving the inner characters of others. He looked into Zoro's soul not once but twice and recognized him as a worthy challenger. And don't forget the scene at Marineford where he said about Luffy that he possesses a most dangerous ability. The ability to draw others to him. That is not surface level observation, that is the ability to read will. And that fits perfectly with the ringed eyes. Mihawk is not a strong swordsman, he is the strongest swordsman because he never stopped being that thought. Ha, see? You thought I was actually making fun of him, but in reality, I actually think Mihawk is pretty cool. I mean, who doesn't? The guy has drip. And speaking of drip, let's briefly talk about Cavendish again. I mean, personally I think he's a bit over the top, but the women of the One Piece world seem to disagree. Anyway, earlier I mentioned that the ringed eyes in Cavendish's case only appear when both personalities control the body at the same time, Cavendish and Hakuba. But what do we actually know about Cavendish? We know that he was exiled from his home kingdom, the bourgeois kingdom, because he was too popular. For some reason that caused problems. Problems Sanji would gladly accept any day. What we also know is that Hakuba only appeared after Cavendish left his homeland. More precisely, it seems that the Rommel Kingdom was the location of Hakuba's first sighting. There, during a Jack the Ripper style incident, he slashed multiple civilians and even defeated marines who tried to capture him. So now we need to determine how Hakuba came into existence. In my opinion, there are two possibilities. The first is that Hakuba is a manifestation of rage that built up within Cavendish after being exiled from his home. However, based on his outward behavior, this does not really seem to match. The second possibility is that something happened, that another soul somehow took possession of his body and that only his strength prevents it from permanently taking over. I will expand on this idea through Caribou. If we look closely at Caribou, he is not very strong and does not act like someone with a coherent sense of self. Quite the opposite. In this cover story, people mistake him for a revolutionary named Gabodu, a commander who was supposedly already dead. Caribou seems to have no memory of this, or he refuses to acknowledge any connection at all. This does not feel like a simple misunderstanding, it feels like an identity break. Oda has already established this mechanism once, with Cavendish and Hakuba. There, two personalities share the same body, switching control and remaining separate. With Caribou, it seems like this type of parasitic coexistence took place permanently. as if a second identity fully settled inside his body and pushed the original out. But unlike Cavendish and Hakuba, the original identity does not participate anymore. It does not surface, it does not comment, and it does not resist. It exists only in the perception of others, but not in Caribou himself. The world recognizes Gabudu, but Caribou only recognizes Caribou. That is not a switching state, that is a full override. And there is one question I keep asking myself. Why is he so desperate to find Teach? I believe that whoever is currently inhabiting Gabudu's former body wants something from Blackbeard, and we will likely learn what that is later. But under this light the ring dice become even more interesting. In this case they would not represent enlightenment or clarity like Mihawk, but instead a sign of permanent altered state of consciousness. A lasting override in which the original identity was displaced and the host no longer resembles who they once were. Gabudu was the body, Caribou is the one residing inside it now. If I'm right, it would imply that in the world of One Piece, the transfer of souls into other bodies is possible. And guess what? We have already seen that multiple times. Think back to Punk Hazard and what Law did with his Devil Fruit. Multiple characters, including Straw Hats, swap bodies there. So why shouldn't it also be possible for multiple souls to reside inside a single body? Which brings me to a brief detour regarding our friend Marshall D. Teach. There are countless theories about why he is capable of wielding multiple Devil Fruit abilities. Personally, I believe he houses multiple souls. In my opinion, this explains his shifting behavior at different points in the story, as well as Oda constantly drawing him with more or fewer teeth. But as I said, that is just a brief side note.
Then why doesn't he have ring dice?
Were you not paying attention? I already said that Cavendish's ringed eyes only appear when both personalities are active at the same time. That is simply not the case with Blackbeard, and honestly it probably should not be. Especially considering what we learned at Annie's lobby about the consequences of having multiple Devil Fruits inside a single body.
Right.
And with that, we have them. The 5 characters in One Piece who permanently possess ringed eyes. And I think I have made a decent case for why these eyes could indicate that a permanent shift in consciousness has taken place. To me, this is nothing less than a form of conscious or unconscious self-hypnosis. Now ask yourself one simple question. Why does Oda focus so much on hypnosis early in the story? Django, Miss Golden Week, Lafitte, and even Brook all use forms of hypnosis or mental manipulation. That is not coincidence. And it was not written as a gag, it is a theme. The idea that one can reshape one's own identity through will, mania or obsession is something that runs throughout One Piece. And when we think about it, similar states can also be observed in characters like Big Mom, the Minx or even Robin. Big Mom's altered state during her hunger pangs resembles an extreme form of possession. She functions like someone whose soul is trapped in an anomalous state. Fittingly, she is capable of manipulating the souls of others and giving life to objects. The Minx fall into a manic state at the side of the moon, operating as if under a hypnotic trigger. It is primal, intuitive, and difficult to control. And with Robin, we occasionally see flashes of similar eyes, usually when she is protecting her friends. That fits perfectly with her character, because she has been traumatized since childhood and reaches these extreme states only under emotional pressure. These states can be achieved temporarily, but permanently, in my opinion, only through devotion, intense training, or by fully losing control over one's own body. In One Piece, willpower is not just motivation. Willpower alters consciousness, and consciousness alters reality. And that finally brings us back to the very beginning and the question this whole video started with. What do these eyes actually represent? They are not a race, not a bloodline, and not a power-up. They are the visual language Oda uses to show us when a character's mind has crossed a boundary, when the self has been rewritten in a way that cannot easily be undone. And if you ask me, if Doflamingo ever takes off his sunglasses, we will see ringed eyes underneath. Alright, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, you are now one step closer to enlightenment. At least regarding One Piece. And you have my eternal thanks. If you had fun and found the rambling of this humble man entertaining, then please leave a like and consider subscribing. You know what? Hitting the bell might also be a good idea, because that way you won't miss the next video. I also do livestream reactions for new chapters, so if you want to say hi and hang out with me and the crew when I'm live, I'd be glad to have you here. And if you haven't had enough of my crazy theories yet, consider watching this video here on the side, or maybe even check out my entire theory playlist. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.